my eyes from worthless things and revive me in your ways, Lord, for the things that men esteem are detestable in your eyes. To whom shall I go? Your word is life, and I've come to know that you are the Christ. For the lust of the world is passing away, but the Spirit gives life, and the flesh profits nothing. Give me eyes to see the things that to you have not been pleasing. Jesus, help me to crucify every selfish way.
Hello and welcome to Holy Impact Ministries Bible Study Night. I'm Pastor Scott Velain. God bless you and thank you so very much for joining with us here this evening. We are back at it again for another Bible study night, Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. It is the 1st of August as of today. So July 2018 is in the history books, and we are now forging through the month of August. We've got one good month of August of summer left, so we need to make the best out of it because it's summer is just about already gone. That is just unbelievable. So we are just very, very glad to be here. Glad to see everybody here. The chat rooms are filling up. That's always good to see. And we also, I just wanted, before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I just wanted to say a big thank you, a big shout out to our sister Nicole for this month's newsletter. What a great newsletter. I hope you got that. I hope you had a chance to kind of breeze through that. Sister Nicole always does such a great job on the newsletter, and we're so very glad that she is doing that for us and has taken that burden upon herself to do. Her and Sister Diane just do an excellent job of that newsletter, and so I just wanted to say thank you so much, ladies, for that. It is, again, a lot of things going on, and we are going to be forging into the 29th and 30th chapters. We're going to do chapter 29 and 30 this evening. So we're going to look at both of those this evening, and we've got a lot of information for you. We're actually going to see where the tribe of Judah was born, and we're going to see that in the 29th and 30th chapters of the book of Genesis here today. And we're going to learn a little bit about Jacob and this battle that he's been having with his father-in-law. So stay with us because you're going to find some things that are going to be very interesting here this evening. I promise you that. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go over to the website very quickly, and let's just welcome everybody. This is the website, holyimpactministries.com. All you have to do to get a hold of us is just go to holyimpactministries.com. Everything is built into the website there. We have, again, 3 live broadcasts that we do. One is the Seventh-day Sabbath, which is 9 o'clock every Seventh-day Sabbath on Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have the House of David radio program, and that is Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we had a very good radio program, and we had a lot of good comments about our study entitled The Schoolmaster this last Monday evening. So if you have not had a chance to listen to that, you might want to go back and give that a listen. Also, we have our Wednesday night Bible study night, which is what you're looking at right now. And all of those you can get to by simply going to the website at holyimpactministries.com. And again, along with the website, here at the website, whichever page that you go to, you will also be able to download our free PDF files as well. When you go to the Bible Study Night Live, you'll have a little bit of a description here. The videos embedded in there for you. The chat rooms there, you can jump into the chat room if you want to. And here are all of the other studies that we've done into the book of Genesis. They're all right here. So if you've missed any of them, you can get back to them. Left side is the video. Right side is the downloadable PDF file. And that's basically a manuscript of the study with all of the graphics, all of the charts, all of the historical documentation, what have you, is going to be listed in there. And this evening, we'll actually have we'll have another couple of things extra for you in the PDF file for this evening. We'll get to that as we move forward. But again, I just wanted to let you know how to get a hold of us at holyimpactministries.com. So welcome, everybody, to this evening's Bible study. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do a quick break. I'm going to get all the screens ready, and then we're going to get into the 29th and 30th chapters of the book of Genesis. So stick and stay. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Alrighty, very good. And that is just such a great reminder. You know, the idea is to press on and look forward and not to look back. You know, it's written in the Word of God that it's he who puts his hands to the plow and then looks back is not fit for the coming kingdom. And so many times, you know, we often want to look back at all of the drudgery and all of the things that we've been through and what have you. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be looking forward and moving on for the prize and for the crown. So a good reminder, that particular video. Okay, so as we've already seen from last week's study into the 28th chapter of the book of Genesis, Jacob now knows that he is indeed the chosen offspring of Isaac, that was chosen by Yahuwah personally to carry on the covenant of Abraham, his grandfather. Yahuwah had personally told Jacob that he indeed was the one that would carry on the family line, and we saw that in last week's study. And we know that Jacob would later on be renamed Israel, and we know that he would indeed give birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. And we're going to see that here starting in the 29th and 30th chapters of the book of Genesis this evening. Now, we're not exactly sure how long it took Jacob to reach Haran in Mesopotamia, but we do know that it was about a 400-mile journey from the southern end of Canaan all the way to Haran up in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, of course, was Abraham's birthplace, and a large part of Abraham's family still resided there in Mesopotamia, and so did Rebekah's family. And of course, this is why Jacob's there in the first place, to find himself a wife for his from his mother Rebekah's side of the family, just as his father Isaac instructed him. Now, as we've already seen earlier in Genesis, Abraham's servant had taken the same path to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac. But there's a huge contrast between the way that Abraham's servant arrived in Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac and the way that Jacob arrived in Mesopotamia to find a wife for himself. Abraham's servant arrived in Mesopotamia with an entourage of men and camels and gifts to offer the bride of Isaac, while Jacob, on the other hand, arrived with nothing more than the shirt on his back. And so, even though the journey between Abraham's servant and Jacob was much the same, the arrival in Mesopotamia was much different between Abraham's servant and Abraham's grandson Jacob. And we're going to see how this affects Jacob as we journey into the 29th chapter of the book of Genesis. And I just want to make sure that we have, it seemed like I was hearing some popping coming in here from, let me double check that, make sure we've got our sound off here. Let me turn that off here. That way maybe we can stop some of that popping. Every once in a while we'll get a popping. The computer is putting forth some noises here that it should not be putting forth, and we'll see if we can stop that. If not, it's not too terribly bad. Okay. So, before we do anything else, I want to once again read the 29th chapter of the book of Genesis for ourselves so that we can know both what it does say and what it does not say. So, as we always do, let's go ahead over to Eastward, which is our chosen Bible application that we always use, and let's read this together. Starting with Genesis chapter 29, verse 1, it says, "Then Jacob went on his way and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, 'My brothers, where do you come from?' They said, 'We are from Haran.' He said to them, 'Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?' They said, 'We know him.' He said to them, 'Is it well with him?' They said, 'It is well. And see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep.' He said, 'Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them.' But they said, 'We cannot until the flocks are all gathered together, and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep.' While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, 'Surely you are bone of my flesh.' And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, 'Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?' Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, 'I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel.' Laban said, 'It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other. Stay with me.' So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him to be but a few days because of the love that he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, 'Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed.' So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went in to her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, 'What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?' Laban said, It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so, and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When Yahovah saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, Because Yahovah has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, Because Yahovah has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, This time I will praise Yahovah. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. Once again, Jacob winds up at the water well in Haran that belongs to Rebekah, his mother's family. Now, as we read through the Torah, we'll begin to learn a little bit about water well etiquette. Water wells in those days were extremely important, not only because of the great effort it took to dig the well and to maintain that well, but also because the water well sustained the very lives of the people who lived there, as well as their herds and the flocks and the animals that they had. Each well was owned by someone. It was either owned by a local king, or in this case, it was owned by Rebekah's family. These wells oftentimes became a meeting place for not only family members, but for the community as well. And if you didn't own a well, then you had to pay the owner of the well to use the water from their particular well. And so it was commonplace for people to oftentimes meet at these water wells. As we read through the 29th chapter of the book of Genesis, we see that there was a large rock or a stone that covered the mouth of the well that belonged to Rebekah's family. This large stone that covered the mouth of the well was used to help maintain the well and to keep small children from falling into it and small varmints from polluting the water. Once again, it was up to the owner of the well to decide when to move the stone away from the mouth of the well so that the flocks of sheep and animals could be watered, and that generally happened in the evening hours in the cool of the day. At that time, the owner would come, and of course he would remove the stone away, and then the flocks and the animals could be watered, and anyone who was not part of the family would then pay the owner for the water that they used, and then the rock would be placed back over the mouth of the well to protect it. When Jacob arrives at the well, he finds that there are several shepherds there waiting to water their animals, but the owner's not there to remove the rock from the mouth of the well yet. Jacob wants the shepherds to hurry up and to water their animals and leave so that he can have a private conversation with the family members that he came to find. Since Jacob is family, he of course feels justified in rolling the rock off the mouth of the water well and allowing the sheep to drink so that the shepherds could then be on their way, and finally allow Jacob to converse with his newfound family members. In verse 9, we find that Rachel was a shepherdess, which is somewhat unusual for a woman in this area of the world. We know that Bedouin women of the Sinai and the Arabian Peninsula often tended flocks and herds, but Mesopotamian women and eventually Israeli women usually did not tend to the flocks and the herds. This was mostly a male-dominated occupation for Mesopotamian and Israeli people. So this was somewhat unusual, but it was also something that both Rachel and Jacob had in common, because they were both shepherds. Something else that I want to bring to our attention is what some biblical scholars call a contradiction in the Bible. In verse 5, Jacob asked the shepherds if they know Laban, the son of Nahor. In earlier chapters of Genesis, we're told that Laban is the son of Bethuel, not Nahor. What we need to understand is that Nahor is actually Laban's grandfather. What is being described here in verse 5 is which clan Laban belongs to. Laban belongs to the clan of Nahor. Oftentimes the Bible will prescribe or describe people as being from the tribe of so-and-so, or the son of so-and-so, or son who is son of so-and-so. This isn't always necessarily speaking about a father and son relationship. Sometimes it does mean a father and son, but just as often it's simply what it's doing is attaching a person with the clan that he's attached to. In order to know which is which, we simply need to keep things in the proper context, and we know full well that Nahor is Abraham's brother, and that Laban is his grandson, according to previous scripture. So these supposed contradictions of names are not contradictions at all. It was just a normal way of speaking and explaining a person's identity back in that time. After Jacob had stayed with Laban for about a month, Laban asked Jacob what he should pay him. Laban knows that it's not right for Jacob to work for him for free. But more than money, Jacob is interested in Laban's youngest daughter, Rachel. Now we have to remember that Jacob doesn't have anything to offer Laban for his youngest daughter, Rachel. He comes bearing no gifts. He has nothing but the shirt on his back. Jacob just showed up with absolutely nothing. And he has no gifts. He has nothing to offer, anything in the way that Abraham's servant did when he was searching for a wife for his father Isaac. So Jacob offers to work for Laban for 7 years if Laban will agree to allow Jacob to marry his youngest daughter Rachel. And I want us to understand that it was not the custom for a father to sell his daughter to a man in exchange for servitude back in those days. This was something that was very unusual. It was an unusual circumstance. And it's important to understand how Laban's 2 daughters felt about being literally sold for a price. I'd like us to turn to Genesis chapter 31, verses 14 and 15, just to kind of get an idea of some of the animosity that was going on between Laban and his daughters. Again, let's go ahead to Genesis chapter 31, and let's just read this together. It says, "Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, 'Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money.'" As you can clearly see, Laban's 2 daughters were harboring some degree of animosity against their father for doing what he did and treating them like merchandise. And so I want us to understand that this agreement that Laban made with Jacob was indeed highly unusual. And so Jacob works for Laban for 7 years so that he can finally have his permission to marry Rachel. But after 7 years of labor, Laban decides he's going to switch daughters and give Jacob Leah instead of Rachel. And so that evening he sends Leah into the tent and with Jacob, and Jacob unknowingly consummates the marriage with Leah. Of course, when morning comes, Jacob realizes that Laban has tricked him, and so Jacob's a little bit astonished to find out that he's now married to Leah instead of Rachel, the one that he worked for 7 years to have the permission to marry. Laban then gives Jacob some hogwash about local tradition and cons Jacob into working for him another 7 years for permission to finally marry Rachel. Now, this might seem like a dirty trick, but at some point in time, Jacob must have been remembering how he himself tricked his father Isaac into giving him Esau's birthright. In essence, Jacob was simply getting a taste of his own medicine, so to speak. We have to remember that Jacob was already selected by Yah to be the chosen one who would carry on the covenant of Abraham. Jacob didn't need to be deceitful and trick Isaac into giving him Esau's birthright. Yah would have seen to it that one way or another, Jacob was indeed the chosen one. The problem is that Jacob and his mother took things into their own hands. The result was the same, but the method was peppered with trickery and deceit that didn't need to be there. If they would have just trusted Yah to unfold his plan instead of forcing the matter. And we're going to see how people continually do this throughout the Word of God and as we walk through our Father's Torah. And so in the end, Jacob now has to work another 7 years, which is a total of 14 years, in order to have the permission to marry the daughter that he wanted to originally marry in the first place. And there's another reason why this may have happened as well. We'll talk about that as we move forward. So Jacob winds up having 2 wives because of the way that Laban had deceived him. Now, my friends, I want us to remember that Jacob is no young stud. Jacob is well into his upper 80s at this point in time. He's an older man. And so here Jacob is in his upper 80s, just now starting out his family, with not one, but 2 wives. And before we go any farther, I just want to make note of a couple of flaws that can be found in Jacob's character. Jacob unfairly loved and openly favored Rachel more than he did Leah. We're told that Rachel was more beautiful than Leah, and of course we also know that Leah was the older daughter and that Rachel was the younger daughter. One of the things that I want us to make note of is that unlike Abraham's servant, when he came to seek out a wife for Isaac, Jacob never consults Yah about which wife he wants him to have. Jacob never prays, and he never asks his Father in heaven which wife that he wants him to have, the way that Abraham's servant did when he was choosing a wife for his father Isaac. Jacob simply chooses from the lust of the eye rather than from the heart. But we can see that God blesses Leah with the children while at the same time closing the womb of Rachel. So Leah gives Jacob 4 sons right out of the gate: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. I want us to notice that Leah continuously gives Yah all the praise and the glory each time he gives her another son. Reuben means, "Look, a son," because she knew that Yah had seen her affliction and the fact that her husband Jacob fawned over Rachel, her sister, continuously. Simeon means hearing, because Yah heard her prayers for another son. Levi means joined, because she hoped that at this point in time Jacob would love her because she gave him another son. Judah means praise, because once again she continuously praised Yahovah for blessing her with these 4 sons. Let there be no doubt in our minds that Leah was, again, an extremely good and godly woman who truly had a heart for Yahovah, and Yahovah was blessing her for it. Not only did Leah give Jacob a firstborn son, but take a look at who her sons were: Levi and Judah. Leah was honored with giving birth to the Levitical priesthood, who would be priests and servants of Yahovah. And she was also honored with giving birth to Judah, which would be the tribe that would bring forth the Messiah, who would become the only begotten son of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We must remember that our Messiah came from the house of David and the tribe of Judah. He was indeed a Jew. As we read in verse 35, Leah one last time praises Yahovah for the blessings that he has bestowed upon her, and then she ceases to bear children. At least for a time, anyway. At this point in time, we're going to be moving into Genesis chapter 30, and we're going to be seeing some things that, how things get a little bit heated between Jacob and his father-in-law Laban. Now, as we've already seen, Laban has cheated not only Jacob, but his own 2 daughters, Leah and Rachel. And we're going to see even more deception emanating from Laban as we journey into the next chapter. But once again, it's important to remember that Jacob is the chosen one of Yahovah. Laban learns this the hard way. But as we often see in life, what we do to others oftentimes comes back to bite us where it hurts the most. With that being said, let's read the 30th chapter of the book of Genesis so that we can now know and understand both what it does and what it does not say. So let's go ahead to Genesis chapter 30, and let's go ahead and let's read through this chapter together. Starting with Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that I may have children through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has heard my voice, and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May Yahovah add to me another son." As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go for you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that Yahovah has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and Yahovah has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all the flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and every spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted amongst the goats, and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be as you have said." But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the male goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And when they bred, they came to drink. And the flocks in the front of the sticks, the flocks bred in the front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks towards the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Wherever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock. and they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now, the first thing that I want to make light of is the idea of a man taking on more than one wife, and we haven't talked about that yet. And so before we move forward, I'd just like to make mention of this. It is tectonically important for us to understand that our Father in heaven never intended for a man to have more than one wife. Marriage and the consummation of marriage meant that one man and one woman would become one flesh. That has always been Yah's intention and his unfolding plan from the very beginning. Second, third, and fourth wives were never prescribed by our Creator. Man took it upon himself to take as many wives as he chose, and as we oftentimes see, this absolutely did not turn out too very well for man. When a man takes on even a single wife, it's important to understand that a woman is going to take away much of a man's time, effort, and attention from his Creator. Look what happened to Adam. Adam walked in the garden with Yahovah his father, and he had no problem with the tree of knowledge of good and evil being there with him in that garden. But as soon as the woman was introduced, Adam's attention was taken away from his father, and he loved the woman so much that he chose to partake in her sin with her in order to try and save her from the wrath of Yahovah. As soon as the woman was introduced into the picture, the devil moved in to try and take the man's mind off his Creator and to put his mind on worldly things. And this is one of the reasons why our Messiah clearly tells us that it is better for some people not to marry at all. I'd like us to turn to Matthew chapter 19, verses 9 through 12. And this is a teaching that is difficult for many people to grasp, and our Messiah knew that, and he even says that here. But I want us to read this so that we can understand this. Again, Matthew chapter 19, verses 9 through 12. And let's just read this together. Red letter words from our Messiah. He says, "And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it." Now, just to be clear, a eunuch is someone who has been made incapable of procreating. A person who is a eunuch is not able to procreate, and that's a polite way of describing their situation. The point that we need to see in all of this is that there are reasons for a person not to marry. Let's turn also to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. And I want to go take a look at this and see what Paul told the church at Corinth. And we're just going to read verses 1 and 2 here. Starting with 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. Paul says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband." Paul tells the church at Corinth that it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman at all. But because of the temptation of sexual immorality that the devil uses against us through the flesh, each man should have his own wife and each woman should have her own husband. If we scroll down just a couple of verses to 7 through 9, Paul elaborates even more on this concept. So let's scroll down here very quickly, and I just want to read these as well. Paul says, "I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. And so it's important for us to understand as Christians that if it's better not to marry in the first place, taking on more than one spouse is bound to be a bad idea. And I don't think we have to look any further than King Solomon to know and to understand what happens when we start becoming worldly and entrenching ourselves with the things of this world and the temptations of the eye and the flesh. My point in all of this is that whole denominations have been built on polygamy and the idea that a man is allowed to marry more than one wife. But the truth is that our Father in heaven was very clear in the book of Genesis when he told us that one man and one woman were to become one flesh. And we can see that again from our Messiah, who also says that one man and one woman is to become one flesh, as far as our Father is concerned. I want us to understand that not everything that the patriarchs did was good and righteous and just. When we look at some of the most famous people found within the Scripture, we can see all kinds of flaws and mistakes that they made. We have to remember they were just flesh and bone people like you and I. Just because the Bible records these things does not mean that it's okay for us to do them. If we study the Torah of Yahovah and what he allowed and what he did not allow, we will know what is right and what is not right. Just because our Father in heaven winked in the eye of ignorance does not mean that we should be so presumptuous as to assume that these things are right and just in his eyes when they clearly are not. Let's turn very quickly to Acts chapter 7, verse 30 and 31. I want to go to Acts chapter 7, verses 30 and 31. Let's read this together. Here it says, "At the times of ignorance, God overlooked." Let's read that again. "The times of ignorance, God overlooked. But now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." Men did what they did in those days, but that does not make everything that they did good and proper and righteous in the eyes of Yahovah. Our Father in heaven may not have established a direct commandment that said that man should not have more than one wife, but he clearly did establish the concept of one man and one woman becoming one flesh, and that understanding clearly cannot be refuted. Rachel presumptuously gives her handmaiden Bilhah to Jacob to bear a child in her stead. But we'll soon find that if Rachel would have simply turned to Yahovah and had patience, she could have bred that child herself. The problem was that these two rather superstitious sisters had a battle going on for the attention of their husband Jacob. Once again, we can see all kinds of reasons why a man should never take on more than one wife. It simply is not natural, it creates all kinds of problems, and the drama never seems to end. Even in Abraham's time, we saw all of the turmoil and all of the drama and all the problems that were created with Sarah, when Sarah gave Abraham her handmaiden Hagar, and she bore him Ishmael. Once again, we can see very clearly that Sarah never had to give Abraham her handmaiden Hagar in the first place. Sarah finally did bear Isaac when Yahovah decided it was time for her to bear Isaac. Something else that's interesting to see is that even Leah, who was the more godly of the two sisters, fell into the trap of giving Jacob her handmaiden Zilpah instead of trusting in Yahovah. Once again, if she would have just trusted in Yah, she herself would have been able to give her husband that child. But because her sister Rachel seemed to be outpacing her, Leah too turned away from trusting Yah and decided to take things into her own hands. The point is that both Leah and Rachel continued to give Jacob children even after giving him their handmaidens. And so what they had done just complicated things. Nevertheless, the plan of Yahovah went forth, and the 12 tribes of Israel went forth just as Yahovah had planned. But things could have been much better and a whole lot easier for Jacob if he would have simply trusted in Yahuwah and asked him for guidance instead of listening to his 2 wives and taking on 2 more wives. Now, with all of that being said, I want to explain once again that handmaidens who were given to men as wives were never really counted as wives as we know them today. The handmaidens of Rachel and Leah were what we know today as concubines. They never really had the full stature of a wife because they were still handmaidens to Rachel and to Leah. Bilhah and Zilpah never stopped being handmaidens to Rachel and Leah. And so even the children that Bilhah and Zilpah bore from Jacob legally belonged to Rachel and Leah, at least according to the legal commandments that they had created for themselves back in that day. But I want us to understand that concubines were indeed loved and cherished in those days. The concubine was included as part of the family, but the role that they played was somewhat different from a full-fledged wife who was not originally a handmaiden. And again, these concubines were well taken care of, and they were provided for just as much, if not more, than the rest of the clan. Bilhah, Rachel's servant, bears Jacob a son in Rachel's name, and she calls him Dan, which means to judge. She also gives him another son, and she names him Naphtali, which means wrestling or contest. Zilpah, Leah's servant, bears Jacob another son, and Leah calls him Gad, which means good fortune. She then bears him Asher, which means happy. And so we begin to see how the 12 tribes of Israel are brought into the world through Jacob. Later on in the chapter, we see Reuben, Leah's son, gathering mandrakes out of the field. Now, mandrakes were known to be an aphrodisiac back in those days, and so Reuben was gathering these mandrakes for his mother because she obviously confided in him about how unhappy she was about her sister Rachel taking all of her husband's attention. And so this was what the mandrakes were all about. Reuben was gathering these mandrakes for his mother because he thought that these mandrakes would help impregnate his mother so that she could gain favor with Jacob. These mandrakes were once again widely known throughout paganism as powerful aphrodisiacs. Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, had a nickname that was oftentimes called, and she was oftentimes called, the Lady of the Mandrake. The Song of Solomon actually has connotations to the mandrake as well. And so these mandrakes had a pretty reputable reputation back in those days. But just like many of the home remedies that we see in places like Facebook and YouTube today, not all of them truly work the way people say that they do. What's important to realize is that these mandrakes were nothing more than pagan superstition. Leah, who gave up her mandrakes to Rachel, produces 3 more children, while Rachel, who was the one who wound up with the mandrakes, remains barren for the next few years. And so, once again, we see the underpinnings of superstition and paganism going on that clearly stems from Laban's family. And we'll see more of how paganism played a part in the upbringing of Rachel and Leah as we move forward. In the meantime, Leah gives Jacob another son, and she calls him Zebulun, which means dwelling, because Leah thought for sure that because she was giving Jacob more sons than Rachel was, that Jacob would surely make his dwelling with her for the most part, and he would give up his attention for her sister Rachel. We also see something very unusual listed here in Genesis chapter 30. We see the inclusion of the name of a female child called Dinah that's born to Leah. Mothers and daughters are oftentimes very, very close. And this very well could have been a gift from Yahuwah because of the loneliness and the alienation that Leah felt from her husband Jacob. In the meantime, Rachel gives birth to Joseph. Rachel announces that God has taken away my disgrace. The Hebrew word translated as taken away is asaph. In the next verse, Rachel goes on to say that she therefore would name him Yosef, because Yah had added another son to her. Yosef means to add. Asaph means to take away. This was an extremely prophetical name for Joseph, because in a few years we'll find that Joseph would be taken away from his father, and then many years after that would be added back in again. And so again, this is very prophetical, the way that he just happened to be named with a name that means to take away and to add back. And so moving forward, Jacob had worked for Laban for about 14 years. And at this point in time now, he's ready to have this service acknowledged as paid in full by Laban. But the very crafty Laban has a few more tricks up his sleeve. Laban knows that he's gotten fat off the presence of Jacob being there and shepherding and raising his animals. And Laban knows that he's gotten rich off the presence of Jacob because Jacob was chosen and favored by Yahovah. What's interesting is how Laban knows that Jacob is chosen and favored by Yahovah. If we look at verse 27, we see that Laban knows that Yahovah is blessing him because of Jacob through what? Divination. The Hebrew word for divination here is the Hebrew word nakash, and it means through magic or an enchanter or fortune-telling. And we know that we're using this word in the proper context because we've already seen the evidence of Laban's two daughters using mandrakes in an attempt to bear children. And we also see in the very next chapter, in chapter 31, that Rachel steals her father's precious idols out of his home and takes them with her without the knowledge of her husband Jacob. And we'll get into that as we get into the next chapter. But Laban is a pagan spiritualist that believes and puts his trust in the spirit world. Laban believes in many gods, and he believes that the God of Jacob is just one of several different deities or gods. But Laban believes that he has an upper hand with the gods, and he continues to trick Jacob into doing his work for him and keeping Jacob under his thumb. But of course we know that Jacob's God is much more powerful than all of Laban's pagan gods put together. The idea of the sticks that Jacob uses to turn the goats and the sheep speckled and spotted has been called everything from rank superstition to flat-out baloney by biblical scholars. But the truth is that science has now proven that what a mother eats can indeed affect her offspring. In fact, scientists at Duke University Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina, have shown that by treating mice supplements high in simple molecular compounds, they can actually create mice with yellow hair. And so it shouldn't surprise us to know that a shepherd who has done nothing else but shepherd his whole life would know a thing or two about how to create speckled and spotted livestock. This is not the first time that the Bible has taught scientists a thing or two concerning nature and the universe that we live in. And I'll be sure to leave you a link also to that particular website. There's a website here. I don't know if let me see if I still have that. I might even still have that up here just to kind of show you this. Yes, let me go back over here very quickly. This is the website here. It's called Biblical Foundations. And again, you can read through this and you can talk about what we know. They talk a little bit here about what we know about speckled and spotted sheep and goats and how to make them that way. And I want to just read this last paragraph down here. It says the conclusion after you read all this. It says, "Here again we see God's divine wisdom and genetics at play some 3,700 years ago, and today verified by science and medicine. This goes to show even the stuff atheists want to point to as proving the Bible is filled with fables and legends all have hard science and real-life truth in them. The Bible proves itself undisputed with statement of facts long before anyone knew anything about genetics and how diet can change it." And again, they've already proven that you can actually change a white sheep to a speckled or spotted sheep by changing their diet. And there's a whole article here on that. So I just wanted everybody to know and to understand that that's there. And I'll include this link for you in the PDF file as well if you'd like to download it. So With all of that being said, my friends, that brings us to the beginning of Genesis chapter 31, which we will get into next Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And once again, I just want to remind everybody that everything we do at Holy Impact Ministries is free for everyone, and we're trying desperately to keep it that way. But in order to do that, we need sponsorship. If you have found value in what we teach and preach here at Holy Impact Ministries, we'd like you to consider sponsoring the work that we do here. If our Father in Heaven has put it into your heart to support this ministry, you can do so by visiting us at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Holy Impact Ministries. Or you can simply click on the donate button at our website at holyimpactministries.com. And as we always ask, my friends, please, 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 take what you've heard here to your prayer closet and face the holy promised land of Jerusalem and bow your head and bend your knee and ask in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach if what you've heard here today be true or not. Ask, seek, and knock, and the door will be open to you. And remember to test everything, absolutely everything. And again, my friends, as we already know, truth does not come from any pastor, priest, bishop, or pope. It comes from our Father in heaven. And if we have truth, we got it from him. And anything that's not truth is not of him. So once again, we need to be sure that we are studying the Word of God and his Torah so that we can test the fruit of men who are teaching and preaching his Word. So, with that being said, my friends, once again, I just want to pray over us all in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Thank you, Father, in the name of Yeshua. We bless your holy name, high and far above all names, and we thank you for this time that we've had together to bind together and to come together and comb through your word and to learn as much as we possibly can through your spoken Torah. In the name of Yeshua, we pray, Father, that you would continue to give us the discernment that we need to see the things that you want us to see and to understand the things that you want us to understand. Help us to stand on your wisdom and not the wisdom of men and their so-called early church fathers. Help us to know and to understand through your Ruach HaKodesh, who you sent to help us to understand and to know these things, what the truth is, and help us, Father, to spread that truth. In the name of Yeshua, I pray, Father, that you would bind us together and help us to endure to the end. And with that being said, my friends, I just want to say thank you so very, very much once again for joining us here at Holy Impact Ministries for our Wednesday night Bible study. Be sure to visit us at holyimpactministries.com. We've got lots of information for you there and hundreds of hours of studies on all kinds of biblical topics. With that being said, my friends, God bless you and thank you so very much. Shalom, everyone. We will see you this next coming Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Shabbat service. Shalom, everyone.
For the things that men esteem are detestable in your eyes. To whom shall I go? Your word is life, and I've come to know that you are the Christ. For the lust of the world is passing away, but the Spirit gives life, and the flesh profits nothing. That to you have not been pleasing. Jesus, help